When the vacancy notice for keeper of the palace waste channels appeared on the imperial board, nobles found urgent excuses to be elsewhere. Because on Aurelian Prime, no one wanted command of filtration shafts, recycling tunnels, sanitation drones, overflow locks, and the hidden machinery that kept the Golden Palace from choking on its own grandeur. The job was thankless and humiliating. So when a human named Adrian Vale stepped forward and accepted it without protest, the court laughed openly. Lady Syrinx of House Thallon smiled like she had witnessed a species confess its place. Adrian signed the contract, requested the maintenance schematics, and descended into the underlevels. They thought he had accepted a dead-end post. They did not realize he had taken hold of the palace heartbeat. For 2 weeks, nobody above the service decks noticed him. Adrian walked every corridor himself, learned which pumps rattled before pressure spikes, which vents stuck in dust season, and which drains backed up during state banquets. The previous keepers had treated the office as ceremonial punishment. But Adrian read everything, every repair delay, every maintenance warning buried under festival budgets, and when he surfaced at a budget session in gray coveralls, he calmly informed the Chancellor that the Western Residence Wing was nearing failure, that the Queen Mother's baths sat above corroded membranes, and that the palace nursery used air processors 9 years overdue for overhaul. The room answered with laughter. The Chancellor advised the human to return to his pipes, and moved on. Adrian nodded, went back below, and filed his warnings through the legal archive. 6 days later, the Western Wing flooded with gray water. The Queen Mother's garden corridor had to be sealed. The nursery processors were found to be venting spores, and before the court had finished shouting, Adrian's crews had isolated the lines, rerouted pressure, repaired the nursery system, and restored service before dawn. The Chancellor lost prestige, and the human keeper gained proof. Once a palace depends on the man it mocked. The balance has already begun to shift after that. Adrian stopped being a joke and became a problem, because competence offends people who inherited importance. He discovered which kitchens underreported water use to hide theft, which servant barracks were being starved of heat, and which courtiers used forgotten service routes to bypass security. He did not expose everything at once. Instead, he fixed systems in the order that made himself unavoidable. First, sanitation stability, then water recovery, then thermal routing. And each time he improved a system, he reinstated override rules that required the keeper's approval during emergencies. Then he made allies among the invisible cleaners, drone mechanics, archive clerks, gardeners, nursery staff. The people nobles never saw yet depended on every hour. And suddenly, Adrian Vale was no longer one man with a dirty title. He was the central node in a network that made the palace function when banquet halls overheated. They asked for him when fountains failed. They asked for him when the imperial air became trapped behind a storm door during a power flutter. Adrian opened the manual release in 20 seconds, while aristocratic security officers argued over protocol. Each rescue made the same fact harder to deny. The human understood the Golden Palace better than the people born to rule it. Palaces do not collapse only when armies breach the gate. Sometimes they begin collapsing when the wrong man learns how everything works. So the nobles moved to remove him, first with procedure, then with panic hidden under courtesy. Lady Syrinx proposed a reform that would divide waste, water, climate, and maintenance authority among 12 noble subcommittees, which sounded elegant to everyone who had never held a wrench. Adrian attended the review in fresh gray uniform, placed a data rod on the table, and said the reform would increase emergency response time by 300%, invalidate 400 override chains, and create cascading failures during storm conditions. Syrinx smiled and said the palace had functioned before him and would function after him. Adrian touched the projector, and a living map of the Golden Palace rose over the chamber. Service arteries, thermal loops, drainage trunks, and filtration nests, half of them flashing with dependencies patched, rerouted or stabilized under his authority. Then he brought up access logs, repair delays, noble exemptions, and budget diversions spanning 20 years. Not as scandal, but as operating context. He had not merely cleaned the palace, he had documented the truth of it. Syrinx asked whether he was threatening the great houses. Adrian answered, "No, my lady. I am explaining why none of you can remove me without admitting how close this palace has been to failure under your supervision." Even the Emperor, who had arrived expecting a petty review, stopped smiling at that. The man with the lowest title had just made himself taller than noble blood. They tried softer knives next, a promotion away from the underlevels. A pension, a governorship. Adrian refused every offer, because he understood what they still refused to see. The job no noble wanted had never truly been about waste. It had been about continuity. Water, air, heat, movement, sanitation. The invisible systems beneath ceremony, and whoever controlled those systems did not wear a crown, but decided whether crowns kept functioning at all. Then came the Festival of Ascension. Thousands filling the upper terraces, delegations in the throne complex. And in the middle of it all, Adrian caught a pressure deviation no one else even knew how to read. Sabotage, time to rupture toxic backflow through the upper climate channels. He had 4 minutes. He sealed the blast path, vented poison into dead reserve stacks, rerouted cooling away from decorative wings, and manually opened evacuation shafts that had not moved in 80 years. When a secondary explosion knocked out half the central lifts, it was Adrian who strapped the Emperor into a maintenance harness and hauled him through a service spine, while nobles stumbled in smoke behind them. By dawn, the saboteurs were dead or captured. The palace still stood, and the court waited for the human to name his reward. Adrian asked for permanent authority over palace infrastructure, protection for underlevel staff, and a direct reporting line to the throne. The Emperor granted all three before noon, and from that day onward, every noble on Aurelian Prime learned the same humiliating lesson. Never sneer at the person willing to do the work you call beneath you, because one day you may discover your empire rests on his hands, and by then, he will be impossible to remove.